12, Frances Jane Crosby, or Fanny Crosby. I think we can say without a doubt the greatest American hymn writer. She wrote over 8,000 hymns, argue with that. Jerry Falwell, number 11, founder of the Moral Majority, and Pat Robertson, number 10, founder of the Christian Coalition. They are both included because of the impact they had on American politics for, I don't know, probably about a 20, 25-year period. George Whitefield, evangelist of the Great Awakening in the 18th century, which was the first major revival that we had in the United States. Jonathan Edwards, number 8, started the Great Awakening in the 18th century by preaching a series of 5 sermons in an obscure town in Massachusetts. And he later preached the most famous sermon ever written in English, called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And I had a thought, which I will share after we get through the list. Henry Ward Beecher is included as the most prominent of the abolitionist preachers, and obviously the abolitionists had a huge impact. Slavery was outlawed. Depending on what your view of Lincoln is, it was either outlawed with the Emancipation Proclamation or it was outlawed when, after the war, when the Constitutional Amendment was passed. Boy, we're in the top 10 now.
We'll discuss that later.
Pardon?
So we'll discuss that later.
Harriet Beecher Stowe, who you will notice her middle name is the same as Henry Ward Beecher's last name, and yes, they were brother and sister. She wrote a little book in 1851 called Uncle Tom's Cabin, and completely changed the morality of half the population of the United States. And as Lincoln later commented to her when she visited in the White House, so you're the little lady who wrote the book which started this war. My personal favorite, Deborah's personal favorite, was Mother Ann. My personal favorite is Amy Semple McPherson, who I think is fascinating on many, many levels. She's the founder of the Foursquare Gospel Church in California, which later became the Foursquare Gospel denomination, which has over 7 million members in it. The U.S.A. has about 2 million, just to give you a comparison. She was an evangelist, and the reason she's on here isn't so much the Foursquare Gospel denomination, but because she took this oddball, almost cult-like thing called Pentecostalism and made it into an international sensation. And Amy Semple McPherson, one of her best traits was the fact she was young, appealing, and very attractive, so people tended to come listen to her. Her main bad point is that she was young, appealing, and very attractive, which eventually got her in some trouble, which we will talk about in some detail when she burst out of the Sonoran Desert in Mexico claiming she had been kidnapped, but no one could find any evidence to back up her being kidnapped. So we will talk about all of that. But Pentecostalism, we wouldn't even have heard of it today if it wasn't for Amy Semple McPherson. Francis Asbury, number 4, the first Methodist bishop in the colonies of the United States. Also, the first major circuit riding preacher. Probably all of you are somewhat familiar with the idea of a circuit riding preacher. We had little towns on the frontier, and they weren't big enough to justify having a full-time minister. So you'd have a guy who went on a 4 to 6 week circuit, and he would preach in different towns and then move on to the next one. And interestingly enough, that was the model in this church until early 1960s. This church used to have a pastor 1 week a month, and the rest of the time they didn't have a pastor. So if you've ever wondered why Sunday school traditionally is so important in this church, that's because 3 days out of 4, that was the major thing that people came into this church for. Number 3, the next 3, any one of them could have been number 1. Number 3 is William Penn, established a haven of religious tolerance called Pennsylvania, essentially wrote the Bill of Rights 100 years before it became the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution. Dr. Martin Luther King, number 2, evangelical preacher, primary force behind the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. So similar to the abolitionists, huge impact on the United States. So did King. And then number one is Billy Graham, simply because he is the most successful evangelist since Paul of Tarsus. Preached to more people than any evangelist ever has in the history of the United States or anywhere else. And if it wasn't for the fact that people will probably think I was blasphemous, I might have said he was the most successful evangelist of all time. But Paul is the one that made Christianity a non-Jewish religious denomination, so you still probably have to have him.